facing here. Now, folks, I want to just be pretty blunt and direct here today. I don't want to beat a skunk at a garden party, but I also it's important that we deal with the truth. I don't want to be political. I'm not pessimistic, because every challenge that we face in this arena is solvable, but I am going to tell the truth. And the truth is, we are not anywhere near where we need to be with respect to the overall challenge of climate change and even the challenge of the oceans. I had the enormous both pleasure and challenge and privilege, it really was a privilege, to be able to lead the negotiations in Paris and work for 4 years, actually for a lifetime, for my 28 years in the Senate, with Al Gore and Tim Wirth and John Warner and a whole bunch of us who have been committed to this for a long time. And the Paris Agreement really wasn't written overnight. It was written as the product of decades of negotiations and lots of failures. As George Mitchell once said, you know, negotiating is 700 days of failure and 1 day of success, the day you get it done. And that's how you have to go at this. But the Paris Agreement began really when we went to China. I went to China in the first 6 weeks of being secretary, and we changed the dynamic of the failure of what had happened in Copenhagen, where we just failed. The international community failed. And we all remember the disaster of China and the G77 going off in a corner and President Obama having to basically chase them and force a meeting to try to even get some kind of communique that made sense. So went to China, met with President Xi, and we created a working group with the intention of being able to announce our mutual reductions and emissions together in order to send a different signal. 1 year later, President Obama and President Xi did indeed stand up in Beijing, and we announced the intended reductions of China and the United States together and said, together, we're going to go to Paris and we're going to make that a success. Well, within months or weeks, Europe followed. Others began to follow. And indeed, we were able to meet in Paris, almost 200 nations strong, in order to define common but differentiated responsibility in a different way for the first time. We almost balked, but in a late night meeting, we managed to bring some of the reluctant parties on board to join into the effort. And there's a reason I mention this in the context of what is happening on the oceans, because we came out of Paris, ultimately, as you all know, with the Paris Agreement, which was an acceptance by each and every nation to do what it could. It wasn't close to what we tried to do in Kyoto, and I remember trying to manage the Kyoto Agreement on the floor of the Senate. We couldn't get anything. Robert Byrd and West Virginia and Cole and all these people resisted anything happening because China and the others weren't doing anything, let alone enough. So we managed to come together and create a structure, and now we have a president who, without any knowledge of the issue, without any scientific fact whatsoever, lying to the American people about a burden to the United States, which is not a burden at all, because no country accepted to do anything in Paris that was not within the capacity of that country to achieve. And the fact is, the burden is not responding. 3 storms, Harvey, Irma, and Maria, cost $265 billion. That's 1/3 of the Defense Department budget. It's more money than we put in to the Energy Department, the Commerce Department, the Education Department, and 3 or 4 other departments put together. That's a burden. And so for the president to stand up in front of the American people and say, it's too much burden, we have to get out of Paris and withdraw American leadership from an issue that is life or death, is one of the single greatest acts of irresponsibility by a president of the United States anywhere at any time. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to tell you something that's not going to be news to you. I think everybody's beginning to learn it, but the American people are way smarter than this president. And that's why That's why 38 states in the United States of America, under the leadership of people like Jerry Brown and Jay Inslee, who was just here, and other governors and mayors all across our nation, they have been able to take a stand. Those 38 states have renewable portfolio standards that are mandatory. 29 of them, I think, are mandatory. 8 of them are voluntary. But guess what, folks? That's 80% of the American population that is committed to continue to try to meet the goals that we set in Paris. And what's so damning about this is that we knew, and I said in Paris at the end of when we passed it, that we're not leaving Paris. We didn't leave Paris, knowing that we had a guarantee that we're keeping the rise of the Earth's temperature to 2 degrees centigrade. We knew that. That's the goal. But we left Paris sending the most important signal we've ever sent to the private sector, that all of these 196 countries are going to try and do this for the first time. And that signal worked. Because last year, the year before, $358 billion went into alternative, renewable, and sustainable energy. For the first time ever, we spent more money investing in alternative, sustainable energy than in fossil fuels. So the signal was sent. You can clap. It's all right. But the danger, here's the danger. The danger is that, not that we won't get there at some point in time. The danger is we're not going to get there in time. That's the reality as we sit here today in San Francisco and as people go about their business in the United States of America and around the world. We have 200 gigawatts of coal-fired power plants coming online, with another 450 gigawatts planned. China, which is currently leading with quotes around it on the issue with respect to solar and other issues, because the United States has retreated as an administration, is the worst offender, I regret to say. But I won't go into all the problems of that. And you've got India close behind, and then Russia, and Indonesia, and other countries. So, folks, it's just not going to work if that's where we are. What we need to do, we made a commitment to $100 billion to the climate fund in Paris. $10 billion was actually pledged. Only $3 billion has been paid. $1 billion came from the United States of America, which we managed to slip in the Obama administration before we left, and therefore it's in the budget. And President Trump has promised that we won't spend one dime more. Let me tell you what a president ought to be doing. The president ought to be convening the G20, locking the doors of the room, and making it clear nobody's going to leave until $100 billion is in the bank, and we're helping small nations transition without having to build coal-fired power plants. We shouldn't build one more coal-fired power plant in the world. Now, oceans, which are key to this. Oceans have been part of my life since obviously since I was a kid. When I was 3 years old, and dipped my toes into Buzzards Bay in Massachusetts and went clamming and sailing. My dad actually is a great sailor. He sailed across the ocean in a 39-foot boat 3 times. And so I have a passion for the ocean. So much so that I started a series of conferences called Our Oceans Conference. We did the first one in Washington. The second one, the Chileans stepped up, and they took it on. The third one, we did again in Washington before we left. We had what we called the $1 billion panel, where Julie Packard, on behalf of the Packard Foundation, committed $550 million over 5 years in order to try to have enforcement and deal with more research and help to protect the oceans. The Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation committed $250. The Walmart Foundation, $220. We raised $1 billion in one single panel in order to try to protect the oceans. And then the next year, Malta did it, just last year. This year, we're going to Bali in a few weeks for the next round of the Oceans Conference. Norway will do it next year. And guess who's doing it after that? Russia wants to do it. People are understanding that vast as the oceans may be, powerful as they are, all the poetry and all the literature that's been written about the oceans, they are vulnerable. And we're killing them with trash, with plastic, with pollution, with runoff, with development, with overfishing. A third of all the fisheries in the world are already overfished. The others are almost at maximum. We have too much money chasing too few fish. I mean, this may sound funny to you, but 450 million Chinese have come in from poverty to the middle class. And they now have discovered blue tuna and sushi. Guess what happens? Illegal fishing. Ted Stevens and I years ago took illegal fishing and drift nets to the United Nations. They banned them. But we still have renegade pirate fishermen who go out there from particularly some Southeast Asian and North Asian countries, and they strip mine the ocean. And 2/3 of that fishing catch is thrown overboard. Thrown overboard. We live in an ecosystem. The president doesn't seem to understand what that means. An ecosystem where each part is dependent on the other. The ocean is the greatest sink there is on Earth for CO2. But a few years ago, scientists noticed that a certain portion of CO2 was being regurgitated down in Antarctica. The oceans are critical to the flow, to the movement of climate. The El Nino. All of these things matter. Some scientists have even prognosticated that maybe we could lose the Gulf Stream. That the oceans could change because the water temperature is changing. The water temperature is what is contributing to all these storms. Their intensity, they come at us faster. More fires. We'll have refugees in the world. We'll have food production interrupted. This is just logic. Logical. We're living in a very strange world, folks, where logic doesn't have the impact it used to have, where facts, you can't even build in our political structure a basis of what is a fact. 2 and 2 is 4, 4 and 4 is 8. But Rudy Giuliani can step up and say the truth is not the truth. Please. We've got, just the other day, InfoWars issued a big news alert that the Hurricane Lane that was heading towards Hawaii had been split in half by an energy bolt from Antarctica fired by me. I mean, how screwed up can you be? I fired it from the North Pole. What's going on? I mean, ladies and gentlemen, I've been to Paris, I've been to Buenos Aires, I've been to Poland, I've been to Poznan, I've been to Copenhagen, I've been to Rio. For years, we've all been there. We need to translate this felt need, this known need, this scientific fact into unparalleled political action. The first thing that I did, and I say this to you, I don't want to politicize this, but it matters. In 1970, when I first came back from Vietnam, I didn't protest the war at first. I protested what was happening in the environment. Rachel Carson had inspired us, early 1960s. And so 20 million Americans came out of their homes on the first Earth Day. And that was translated into a political movement where those 20 million, we targeted the 12 worst votes in the United States Congress. And in the next election, 1972, 7 of the 12 were defeated. And I will tell you, as a 28-year veteran of the United States Senate, there is nothing like massive defeat for elected officials on a particular issue to stiffen the spine of the survivors. That's how it works. So I'm just telling you the truth. I know this isn't a political rally or anything, but I'm telling you the truth. If we don't hold people accountable for turning their backs on responsibility, if we don't hold people accountable who raise their hand and take an oath to uphold the Constitution, but they're more interested in upholding their power and the president and a party, we're not being responsible citizens. We have to actually vote, and we have to vote about specific issues. And the magic number is 54.2. That's the percentage of eligible Americans that voted in 2016. When Barack Obama won in 2008, it was 62.3% of eligible voters. That's the story of where we are today. We need to get that $100 billion for the Clean Climate Fund. We need to get Americans and people all around the world to understand this is a race against time. This is a matter of survival. The ocean is where life comes from. That's what Sigourney just said. And she's right. And today, over 50% of our oxygen, about 51%, comes out of the ocean. But if we pollute it to death, if we diminish the amount of phytoplankton, if we kill off those plants with the chlorophyll that produce that oxygen, we are killing ourselves. So we need to make a guarantee that out of San Francisco, out of these meetings, comes not just the agreement of how good it is we're pursuing battery storage, or how good it is that we're moving down the road with respect to, one initiative or another in the states. We have to make it clear that we're going to hold ourselves accountable to make our own democracy work again. And the best thing I can say to you is this, in terms of that. Because of those 38 states, because of Governor Inslee, Governor Brown, and Governor Cuomo, and Governor Baker in my state and others, we're still fighting for common sense. And the fact is that those states are going to continue to pursue the Paris levels. And I can tell you today that while Donald Trump may have pulled out of the Paris Agreement, the American people have not.